All right, welcome to a deep dive. Today, we're not tackling some giant complex system. Not this time. We're zooming right in.
Yeah, focusing on a single, maybe seemingly small connection in a real RC legend,
Yeah.
the Tamiya Frog.
That's it. We're looking closely at step 2 of the re-release assembly, specifically how that front arm piece, MP2, attaches to the front suspension arm tray, MP3.
And, on the surface, it looks like just one screw, maybe a couple of washers holding it together. Looks pretty straightforward.
But our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack exactly why this one pivot point, this joint, is so critical, foundational, really, for the Frog's performance, how it handles.
Yes. You'll see how this tiny step in the manual, just a few parts, hides some genuinely clever engineering. And it has this surprisingly big impact on how your buggy actually drives.
Okay, so let's lay out the key players here. What exactly are we looking at in step 2?
Right, so you've got the front arm, that's MP2, the front suspension arm tray, MP3. These are metal parts. They connect with just one screw. But critically, there are two specific washers involved. The spring washer, labeled BC7, and this other one, the star washer, MP1.
And this isn't just bolting parts together statically, right?
Yeah,
This joint has to move.
exactly. It's a pivot point. It's part of that whole double wishbone front suspension system. But maybe even more important than that, it's where you manually set the initial caster angle for the front wheels.
Ah, right. The manual actually tells you position MP2 and MP3 at a precise 90-degree angle to each other before you tighten that screw down.
And that 90 degrees. That is absolutely key. Now, if you know the original Tamiya Frog, maybe you've heard it had a bit of a reputation.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, sometimes even right out of the box, for having a certain amount of, play or chatter in the front end.
Ah.
This step and those washers are kind of the first line of defense against that.
Okay, so those two little washers, BC7 and MP1, they're not just generic bits of metal then. They have very specific jobs to do.
Precisely. Let's break them down. First, the spring washer, BC7. You can think of it like a tiny, spring acting right under the screw head.
Okay.
As you tighten the screw, it compresses, creating constant tension. It keeps pulling the joint tight along the length of the screw. It maintains what engineers call preload.
Preload.
Yeah, basically ensuring the joint is already under tension even before the car starts bouncing around. This is super important in RC because vibration, things settling,
Yeah.
they can work screws loose.
Right.
So that spring washer helps stop that main screw, the one defining your caster angle, from vibrating loose and backing out. Keeps it tight axially.
Got it. So BC7 keeps things tight lengthways, fights vibration loosening. What about the other one, MP1, the star washer? The one with the teeth?
Ah, yes. That's your rotational security.
Yeah.
Its sharp little teeth are designed to physically bite into the surfaces of both the front arm, MP2, and the suspension tray, MP3, when you tighten everything down.
Bite in. Okay.
It creates a ton of friction and actual physical interference.
Yeah.
That makes it incredibly hard for MP2 and MP3 to twist or shift relative to each other around that screw axis. It effectively locks in that 90-degree angle you set.
So it's like a memory lock for the angle.
Kind of. It really helps maintain that position.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The spring washer keeps the screw tight along its length, axially, and the star washer digs in to stop the parts from spinning relative to each other, locking the angle. They work as a team.
Exactly right. It's a pretty clever dual-action setup. You get security along the screw's axis, and you prevent unwanted rotation at the joint itself. They really complement each other to keep that pivot solid and correctly positioned.
What about something like thread locker? You hear about that a lot in RC, especially for suspension screws. Should you use it here?
That's a good question. Thread locker, the blue kind usually, is an adhesive for metal threads. It's definitely useful in high vibration spots if you're dealing with metal on metal threads and you're not using something like a nylock nut, which has its own locking mechanism.
And here we have metal parts, MP2 and MP3, and a metal screw, presumably threading into metal.
Right. So in this case, using a medium-strength blue thread locker could be a sensible addition. Think of it as an extra layer of security. It helps prevent the screw threads themselves from vibrating loose, working alongside what the washers are doing.
But not essential, maybe just extra insurance.
Kind of, yeah. It complements the washers.
Yeah.
Just a really important warning. Never use standard thread locker on plastic parts. It can make them brittle and crack.
Well,
Metal threads only.
good tip. Okay, so let's connect this all back to handling. Why is getting that 90-degree angle perfect and keeping it locked in with those washers so critical for how the Frog actually drives?
Well, it all comes down to caster. That 90-degree setting directly determines your baseline caster angle. Caster Put simply, it's the angle of your steering pivot axis when you look at the wheel from the side of the call.
Okay.
The Frog uses positive caster. That's what gives you straight line stability. It's the force that makes the steering wheel want to return to center after you turn.
Ah, self-centering.
Exactly. Now, if that initial 90-degree angle isn't spot on when you build it, or maybe worse, if that joint shifts even a tiny bit while you're bouncing over bumps, your caster setting is compromised. It's either wrong or it's inconsistent.
And what does that feel like when you're driving?
Unpredictable handling. The car might feel darty or wander down a straight, constantly needing tiny steering corrections. Or it might steer differently turning left compared to turning right if the caster angles on each side aren't perfectly matched.
Right, asymmetry.
Yeah. So maintaining that precise, stable 90-degree baseline right here at this one pivot point is fundamental. It ensures the whole front suspension geometry works predictably. It's where your consistent, stable handling really begins.
So, based on the sources, any top tips for getting this crucial step right during the build?
Yeah, definitely. First, take your time aligning that 90-degree angle. Use a small machinist square if you have one. It makes it much easier to get it precise.
Good.
Then, tighten the screw firmly. You want those star washer teeth to really bite into the metal surfaces. But be careful, don't go crazy and over-tighten. You could strip the screw threads or damage the tray. Firm is good, brute force is bad.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes. Because it's the Frog, and because of that known potential for front-end play, it's highly recommended to check the tightness of this specific screw again after your first couple of runs. Things can settle, parts can bed in. You want to make absolutely sure that critical 90-degree angle hasn't shifted.
So vigilance is key here.
Pretty much. Minimizing any slop or movement in this joint is the goal. That's what gives you stable caster and precise steering feel.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then, what we've really seen is that this single connection in step 2, how the front arm meets the suspension tray, secured by that specific spring washer and star washer combo, maybe with a dab of thread lock for good measure, it's absolutely foundational.
It really is. It directly sets and, importantly, maintains the core geometry for the Frog's entire front suspension. It dictates that baseline handling predictability you feel.
It's a fantastic reminder in RC building, isn't it? How paying close attention to these seemingly small details, these specific little parts in the manual, can have such a huge impact on performance.
Absolutely. Get this step right. You're building a solid foundation. Get it wrong or let it loosen up, and you'll likely be chasing handling issues.
It really leaves you with something to think about.
Yeah.
How much does the rock-solid stability of just this one tiny pivot point held firm by those two specific washers truly influence the overall feel, the confidence, the control you have over the entire buggy as it's bouncing and vibrating its way across rough terrain?